we've got our code for setting the move right variable, to 0 to 1, then back to 0, but that isn't going to actually move our player. For that, we need to add another event. So in your object editor, in the events list, go ahead and click on Add Event, and let's choose Step. And you'll notice there are 3 options here. We want the one that's just called Step again. Now the Step event is a very powerful event, and we have to be careful how we use it. This event runs every single frame of the game. So if our game is 60 frames per second, then our player object is going to run whatever code is in here every single frame, so 60 times per second. You can imagine that if you have a huge amount of objects in your game, such as enemies or bullets or pickup items, whatnot, and they all have code in their Step event, you can get things like slowdown and poor performance if you have too much going on and things aren't optimized correctly. But we're going to use this event to actually control how our player moves. So first, let's just add a description. We'll just call it player movement. You can call it whatever you like, whatever makes sense to you. And I'm just going to go down to a new line, and we're going to enter in what's called a code block. I'll explain this as we go. So I'm going to add in a comment. It says calculate movement. And we're going to add in some code related to those variables that we wrote in the create event. We're doing math here. Don't worry, it's simple math. So this line here is going to figure out how we move by taking into account whether move right, the value of move right, and then multiplying it by walk speed. Those variables, of course, we made up here in our create event. I'll explain more as we go through. Now we're going to add in a block for if we're not moving at all, called if idle. And we're going to create our first if statement. So in programming, if statements are the simplest way to check for things. You'll be using them a whole lot. Sometimes you can get a little nuts with them, but I think this will be a good introduction. So we're going to type in if vx equals 0, like that. You'll notice I've got 2 equal signs here. When we're checking for a value, we use 2 equal signs. It's just a programming thing. And you'll notice I'm also putting what we're checking for in parentheses. That's just to keep things visually organized. You don't have to do that, but we'll do it as a matter of course just to stay tidy. And we're going to put in an open curly brace, make a new line, and we're just going to put in a comment here. We don't want anything to happen right now. We just want to set up our code so it's easy for us to read. Now, you'll notice that as I hit return and went to a new line, GameMaker Studio just did this. It added in this little box on the left of our code. This is a region that lets us close and open code. As we get into programming more and creating more and more functions and checks and whatnot, this is just a handy way to keep our screen clear. So if we want to just focus on something we're working on and not have a million lines of code in front of us, you can open and close stuff. This doesn't affect functionality. It's just there for ease of use. I'm going to add another block called if moving. And we're going to say if vx does not equal 0. So whenever you see exclamation point plus equal sign, that means not equals. Open curly brace, and then we're going to type in x plus equals vx. Okay, so again, we're asking questions here. In this block here, we're asking, does vx equal 0? And does vx equal not equal 0? You're probably wondering, what's vx? Well, we're calculating that right up here. We're saying vx equals move right times walk speed. How do we get this? If you press the right arrow key down, move right becomes 1. If you release that key, it becomes 0 again. So if you're pressing the right arrow key down and it becomes 1, then 1 times walk speed, which is right here in your create event, which is 16, equals 16. So if it's 16, we're going to move ourselves to the right by 16 pixels. I know, math, but just trust me on this. A couple other things to note too. Notice how I wrote in x plus equals vx. This means add the value of this to x every single frame. So it's like saying plus 16, plus 16, plus 16 every single frame of the game. It's just the programming way to say add something to my value. You'll also notice that x is a built-in variable. So in my case, it's green. It might look a little different depending on how your GameMaker Studio is set up, but that's how we can tell that this is a built-in variable versus something that we made, which in my case is blue. Let's run our game again, and you can see what I mean in action. So go up and hit the run button at the top of the IDE, and you'll see our game like we saw before. Now, if you press right on the arrow key, you'll see that your player will start moving. If you keep holding it, she'll just keep moving as long as you hold it. I'm just going to load the game again to show you. If you press and let go, then she stops moving, which is exactly what we want. So we're doing this in a bit of an indirect way, because rather than applying a series of numbers directly, we're saying we have a walk speed, and we want to multiply that walk speed by whatever the value of move right is. If we are not pressing the right arrow key down, move right is 0. So that means this equation will be 0. And we're saying, well, if this is 0, don't do anything. But we're saying if it's not 0, then add this value to my x position, which is the horizontal position, which in this case will be 16. So it may seem like we took a few steps there, but this will be a really cool programmatic way to learn movement and do a bunch of fancy stuff later on.